The news cycle screams victory, while the battlefield reality whispers stalemate. If a U.S. president admitted that Iran's nuclear program survived and its regime remains intact after months of conflict, it would not just be an admission of failure, it would trigger the immediate collapse of the global sanctions regime. This video explains why Donald Trump cannot claim defeat without dismantling his own leverage, turning what looks like political posturing into a calculated requirement for realpolitik statecraft. The contradiction between endless fighting and claims of total success is not a sign of confusion or deception by design. It is a structural necessity of modern coercion. To understand this dynamic, we must first separate tactical outcomes from strategic goals. In the operations known as Rising Lion and Midnight Hammer during June 2025, U.S. and Israeli forces achieved undeniable battlefield dominance. They disabled approximately 330 out of 470 Iranian missile launchers. This represents a 90% reduction in attacks within a single week. Simultaneously, naval engagements sank an estimated third to over half of the Iranian Navy, including the elimination of more than 250 senior leaders and high-ranking military figures. These are not small numbers. They indicate a catastrophic blow to Iran's conventional strike capabilities. Yet, despite this tactical success, the overarching strategic objective was never achieved. The goal of regime change or total nuclear disarmament remains unmet. While strikes using heavy penetrators on facilities at Fordo and Natanz caused significant physical damage, they did not destroy the program entirely. Iran's stockpile of 60% enriched uranium remains intact across two confirmed locations, the underground tunnel complex at Isfahan and the facility at Natanz. Furthermore, the Bushehr nuclear power plant continues to operate under Russian management. The military has won battles on the ground, but it has failed to secure the end state required for a narrative of total victory. Quick resource note: I keep a curated set of Amazon search links in the description for books, gear, and tools relevant to this channel's topics. Some are affiliate links, so I may earn a commission at no extra cost to you. Please consider supporting the channel by using those links if you find something useful. This is where the logic of realpolitik takes over from the logic of battlefield outcomes. A war that ends without achieving its maximalist goals cannot be labeled a win in diplomatic terms, yet calling it a loss would be strategically suicidal. The primary tool, long-term pressure against Tehran, relies on an international sanctions regime. These economic constraints are fragile coalitions built on shared threats and unified resolve. If the United States were to officially declare that the war was lost because Iran's nuclear program survived, or its leadership remains in power, it would signal a strategic retreat. Admitting defeat effectively dismantles the coalition holding these sanctions together. When allies perceive that military force cannot achieve political objectives, they lose the incentive to maintain costly economic pressure on their own. The threat of future strikes becomes less credible if the current campaign failed to alter the status quo. Consequently, acknowledging a stalemate would embolden Tehran to resume full-scale proliferation without consequence. It would remove the leverage needed to keep Iran's nuclear ambitions in check for years to come. Therefore, maintaining the narrative that the conflict is ongoing and that victory remains possible becomes essential, not for domestic politics, but for international stability and strategic continuity. This dynamic creates a paradox where military success actually requires political ambiguity. The U.S. cannot claim total victory because it has not destroyed the nuclear program or removed the leadership. However, claiming defeat would be equally catastrophic, as it would end the sanctions that have constrained Iran's capabilities since 2018. This is why the rhetoric must remain fixed on pressure and potential rather than finality. It allows the United States to continue applying economic force without having to justify a failed military campaign or admit that its ultimate objectives were unachievable through current means. The Iranian leadership understands this calculus perfectly, which explains their behavior throughout decades of conflict. Historical analysis shows that Tehran has consistently prioritized regime survival over ideological posturing. Following overwhelming force in the past, from 1988 to the present day, they have chosen to live to fight another day, rather than risk total annihilation in a direct confrontation that could lead to their own destruction. They know that if Washington admits failure, it loses its primary bargaining chip. Thus, Tehran's strategy involves weathering storms and waiting for moments of strategic weakness on the other side. By maintaining a posture of resilience and survival, they ensure that any U.S. admission of defeat would be met with immediate exploitation rather than negotiation from a position of strength. The inability to concede is not about ego or political point scoring in Washington. It is about keeping the door closed on Iran's nuclear future for as long as possible. The conflict has evolved into a strategic stalemate where tactical victories have failed to translate into ambitious goals, yet admitting this reality would be self-defeating. As long as the narrative of potential victory persists, the sanctions regime retains its legitimacy and power. This ensures that Iranian leadership continues to calculate their moves within a framework of severe constraints rather than operating with total freedom. The stakes extend beyond any single administration or election cycle. They define the strategic architecture of the Middle East for decades. A shift in rhetoric from pressure to failure would fundamentally alter the balance of power, likely triggering an arms race and destabilizing regional allies who rely on these constraints for their security. The current approach relies on a delicate fiction that military force is still a viable path to policy change, even if the evidence suggests otherwise. This allows time for diplomatic alternatives or further erosion of capabilities through sustained economic strangulation without requiring a military outcome that has not yet materialized. In this framework, Trump's insistence on victory is less about personal vindication and more about preserving the instrument of coercion itself. It is a recognition that in modern statecraft, perception often dictates capability as much as actual firepower does. The refusal to admit defeat keeps the pressure on Tehran, ensuring they continue to face costs for their nuclear activities even when military strikes alone have not achieved total disarmament. This realpolitik calculation ensures that the United States retains its primary tool of influence long after the initial shock of conflict has faded. Thanks for watching all the way to the end. I am a one-person team working hard to make each video better than the last. Subscribe if you found value. It is the best way to show support. Drop a comment with your biggest takeaway. See you in the next video.